So that is a good thing for Indiana. And again, that is over-assumed that that work is easy. It's very time-consuming. We expedited that, and if any of you know anything about government, nothing moves fast in government except for bad news and rumors, but nothing moves fast in government. But we did expedite that because we heard from the field saying we need this done yesterday, and so we are continuing to do that work, but right now 58 courses is pretty impressive. The other thing I want to highlight on Pillar 1 is the ethnic studies and the Indiana studies. We had the courses, we had no standards. So if you know anything about the classroom, that is a big lift to say, hey, teach this course, and you don't have any idea what you're supposed to teach within that course. It also it involves a lot of capacity from the local level to develop that. So we took it upon ourselves as a department with heavy committees across different partnerships and said we need to develop these. I am a firm believer in the Indiana Studies course. It is good for Hoosier students to know about their state. I'm also a firm believer in the power of ethnic studies. It's also a good thing for our kids to be exposed to ethnic studies and understand the importance of working in a diverse culture and also living amongst each other. So it was a big accomplishment to get those done. Early on, some of you saw a little bit more about Indiana Studies come out and Ethnic Studies come out. We will give you more in the spring, but again, those courses are ready to go. Many of them are running, so we will have those numbers here at the end of first semester. On Pillar 2, obviously infrastructure gets a little bit dicier for this because I don't build roads and I don't build bridges. My dad was a civil engineer, so he did. But for us, we looked at how did we filter and how did we support infrastructure. And that became quite obvious when we looked at the information we were getting from our tech plans. We have increased Wi-Fi access to 99% of our schools. How did we get that to happen? Well, part of it was we were under a state contract that we looked at and said we have got to free up some monies, renegotiate, and make sure schools can afford an expansion. We did that. That has happened. We've had some great results. Because of that, we have 10% new courses that are online that 10% new districts have access to. We are also expanding our one-to-one, which is one device to one child, by 10%. So in that infrastructure, we're heavy in technology, which makes a lot of sense. I would love to construct some more roads around some places we need where the traffic's a little interesting in the mornings, but that is not our wheelhouse, but the things that we are under control, we're doing a very nice job with infrastructure. Pillar 3 is really, really heavy, which makes the most sense. Pillar 3 is that piece of developing a 21st century skilled and ready workforce. A big portion of our work right now is aligned with the governor. We have said from the beginning, we understand the importance of STEM, we understand the importance of CTE, we understand the importance of that for our communities, for our state, and frankly for the entire nation. So when we look at that, we have now introduced STEM-infused curriculum into 60 new districts. We trained this last summer and the summer prior to 16,000 educators. 300 of those came out of computer science training. I will tell you, having been in the field and know what that means from the state level, that is beyond impressive. And again, I give all the credit to our team over at PNC who understands where we're going, understands our strategic plan, and is working tirelessly to make it happen. But those are some really great numbers. We are also, for the first time, offering vetted quality STEM curriculum to the field, which they now have a short list that they can go by. They can still have local autonomy. However, so many of our schools came back and said, we don't have the capacity to do this on our own, please help us. We did that, which we're hoping that 60 infused STEM schools will become, or districts will become much more, but they need dollars and they need assistance. And so that is part of what we're doing. For the first time, Indiana has a STEM plan. That came out of the governor's request. We have a STEM council that put that together, and through that came our budget ask and a lot of our charges with professional development, looking at curriculum and looking at career awareness in that area. Also, another piece that I want to make note of is school improvement. Now that ESSA, which has been a nationally recognized ESSA plan, one of the best in the nation from Indiana, part of what came out of that was the need for school improvement to look differently. So we're starting to look at that systemically. We have trained over 1,000 school leaders, that be whether it's administrators or school cheerleaders, to be a part of this. The results we're getting in school improvement over the last 2 years are again impressive. So the schools are moving, and I know that takes a lot of credit to our local schools and as a department, but it's going to take a team effort. But the training is a commitment. It also took dollars, and it took a lot of people rowing in the same direction. So I want to bring that to your attention. Also in Pillar 3, we had 20 districts, and I want to give credit to one of our chiefs, Amanda McCormick. She's actually here today. But she has done an enormous amount of work in the career tech ed field. She has expanded externships for teachers so they can get into the workforce and see what we're trying to teach. We also have had expansion for the first time in summer CTE so that kids can participate in summer CTE courses. 37 districts took advantage of that. That is the first time that's happened in Indiana's history that we could track back. So that's pretty impressive. We know if we're going to move the needle, students can't just do it during the 180 days. We're also piloting cybersecurity in our high schools. 7 high schools currently are piloting that. We're also getting ready to ramp up and add an additional 20. We're doing that in partnership with Project Lead the Way through their cyber curriculum. We hopefully will expand that on down, but just to be one of the first in the nation to introduce that will again set Indiana apart. That goes right along with the governor's initiatives. We are expanding our computer science offerings by 27% of our districts. So 27% of our high schools are now offering computer science compared to where we were. I will be honest, as a state, we were ahead of that to begin with, but now we are just making that gap wider and wider, which is a good thing. Selfishly, we can say that as Indiana, but we see that number continuing to grow. This is not a high school initiative, this is a K-12 initiative. So this isn't about just making sure our high schools have courses. This is about that K-12 touch for that computer science piece. It is beyond coding. Coding is a part of it. Cyber is a part of it, but computer science encompasses a great deal, and we are very cognizant of that. Also, in the area of our at-risk students, for the first time we had TitleCon and we had McKinney-Vento. Why did we do that? We have our homeless student numbers that are growing and our at-risk growing. Our schools were telling us we need help. We need help understanding the law. We need help understanding resources. Where do we get to them? Can you vet them for us? We put that together thinking, we'll do this for the first time, see what happens. We had over 1,500 educators in attendance. With that has exploded into, obviously the need is there, but we need to continue that work. So we have continued moving forward with that very important work for our most at-risk students. On Pillar 3, we also have the $9 million grant that we received for social and emotional learning. That's going to target, so we have models for districts to learn off of each other. We were one of only a few states that received that from the national level, and again, I give our Director Williamson did a great job with that grant and his team, but that will move and change things for us. Anywhere I go, whether it's a small school, mid-sized school, large school, I don't care if it's suburban, urban, or rural, or anything in between, town, I don't care what it is. Everywhere we go, we're hearing from our administrators and our teachers and our counselors and our school bus drivers and everyone saying, we got to address the social emotional piece. The behavioral piece is huge. So we are working diligently. We are developing a plan. For the first time, we have competencies that we work with Butler University and some other universities on. IU has been a great partner with us in the social emotional and the tech world. But this piece for many of our schools are saying it can't come soon enough. So that Pillar 4, which ties into just the wellness piece, the drug epidemic is hitting Indiana hard in many areas, but this is one that will continue to be on our radar. We have also heard from schools on prevention curriculum, prevention, vetted resources, and we are providing those as well. We're still in the beginning, kind of vetting those, which is easier said than done because there's not a lot of great research and evidence out there right now in this arena, oddly enough, but we will continue to work on that with schools. Now to Pillar 5, which is the governance service. We pride ourselves, when I got into office, we said we will calm the field down, and it was a field that needed calmed. And we have done that. We pride ourselves on we are here for a resource, we're here to provide support and services to all of our schools. And if we can't do that well where it's impacting the classroom, we need to shut our doors. So we have remained diligent in the customer service. We are here to service schools, we're here to service students, we're here to service families and communities. This is your Department of Education. We are just honored to work here at this point. So with that, we have done a ton of customer service reflections, and we take that seriously. Right now we have a rating, or an average of 4.5 out of 5, which we're pretty proud of, but I'm kind of competitive, so we're gonna get to 5. We also are modernizing our IDOE services to make things easier for all of you with data, to make things easier for all of our schools to collect data, to modernize that collection, because the amount of time schools are sending to submit is ridiculous. So we're trying to streamline that to help their capacity to help make things easier and more efficient. We also, for the first time, asked teachers, what are your thoughts about your profession? And an interesting 284 districts responded. The timing of that was not great. It was what it was because how government sometimes operates, and it had to be done at that time. But we were very happy with the responses we have. But more than that, our teacher said this is the first time we've been asked. So that bode well for us to get the data and also say you are important. We respect you as a profession. We respect you as people. We want to hear your voice. We promised that from the beginning, and we have delivered, and we will continue to collect their voices. The Indiana assessment system has a ways to go. We're going to talk about that in our legislative agenda, but right now it's as streamlined as it's ever been. We have great resources. That's probably right now when I'm out in schools, and I'm going to Jennings County as soon as I'm finished up today here at the State House, but when I'm out, I hear that more than anything. The resources we're providing for the assessments they've never seen before. So they are aligned to the assessments, they are vetted, they're just been done in a very thoughtful way. Dr. Flores and her team included 1,600 educators to get to this point. So we didn't do it alone. We didn't pretend like we had all the answers, and that's what it takes from this office. The other piece is the cybersecurity phishing and awareness campaign, which has been quite interesting. We've asked districts, do you want to go with this? Because obviously it's a huge problem from the classroom to the district level. 73 districts are participating. About 35,000 staff members are helping us participate. I know as a state, we are also participating as an agency, and in fact, we've gotten to the point where I'm not sure what's a test when our emails come in, if it's phishing or not, and so I'm afraid to delete or not delete anything, and I think many of our personnel at the department have learned a great deal, and districts are as well. It's a skill that not only our students need, but the adults working with our students need. So that has gone over quite well and has been a good service to our districts. So that's where we are right now with the alignment to the pillars. That's where we are at midterm. It's very impressive work. We will not stop. We got a lot more to go in the second half of my term, and we will work tirelessly to make it happen. But I know that alignment piece is extremely important to for the government purposes, for efficiency, and just to move the state in the direction we need to go. So this has been, again, impressive work, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. But now I'm going to pop over to the legislative priorities, which is everybody's waiting on those. So in the legislative priorities, we stayed true to what we did last year. We bucketed them in student learning, school improvement, and operational effectiveness. And we did that because those are the areas that our strategic plan is based upon and how we monitor the pillar work. So in the student learning, we've asked for $20 million of STEM money. If you recall, we had $2 million and we stretched it as far as we could stretch it. My motto is you get as much of that into the local schools or impact a classroom as we possibly can. After we developed our STEM plan with our STEM council, it became glaringly that the ask was going to be huge. So once we got it pared down to, okay, we can't go to the governor or we can't go to our fiscal people upstairs in the State House and ask for those kind of dollars, we pared it back, and I know the $20 million is a big ask. We would be happy to have a lot more, and we certainly could spend it, but those monies will be spent on professional development, would be the charge of that, for curriculum in schools and for that workforce connection. So just so that you know, the first round of our STEM acceleration grants, which came out of the last $2 million that we received, we touched 33,000 students. Unfortunately, we had 124,000 students that were impacted by we couldn't fund it. So we had trouble funding everyone who asked. The good news of that is the urgency is there, the willingness is there, the need is there. We just got to pony up on our end to give them some resources. So the STEM ask will be a $20 million ask in total. That's 10 each year. For teacher mentoring, we are desperately losing 1 year to 5 year teachers at about 35%. That is scary and alarming, and everybody should be concerned. So teachers have options. Everybody in the workforce has options, but and I know it's not just education that's feeling it, but when you're trying to accomplish things for the state and looking at that K-12 and that pre-K-12 piece, losing 35% of your first 1 to 5 year teachers is not where you want to be. So Teacher mentoring, we've heard from a lot of folks, even some of our General Assembly people have reached out and said, what was it? I was under that as a teacher. It was a powerful, if it's done well, I was assigned to a teacher. They were very much what it is a mentor program. It was critical to the state. We would like to see that brought back. It was dissolved in 2000. They even got more than we're asking in 2000, which is a little ridiculous, but we know we have to be realistic. But we're looking to bring back some sort of gift, per se, for those mentors and for those teachers who are participating. We think that's critical. On the way pre-K, we know we need that expansion as we are seeing 84,000 kindergartners walk through our doors. Many of them are woefully ready for kindergarten. So we commend the governor and his efforts and our General Assembly on that. We have 20 counties that are impacted. We understand it's a fiscal concern, but when you have about 3,000 students being served or children being served through that program, we would love to see that expanded to some other counties and pick up some more numbers of our most at risk. So on the way pre-K, I think there's a lot of people in our state that we got to figure out the pre-K piece. We got to figure out the K piece of those kids who are not coming at us until it's very late in the game to be ready for kindergarten. We've got to figure those pieces out. So we will be supportive of expansion of on my way pre-K. Kindergarten cutoff date, if you remember last session, that got moved. Some of our General Assembly felt the pains of that. We're asking that that date get moved back to a November 1. So right now it's August 1. We're being asked that a 4-year-old be admitted until that cutoff date of November 1. Now if they come back at us with an October date, I'm not going to die on that hill. The point is move it back to around count date to capture more kids who are clearly ready. That will still be a parent's decision, and a school, would have the decision as well. But right now you have a lot of schools, because it's right, taking those students and not receiving a dime. And some of our schools it's a loss fiscally, but they're doing what's right for kids. So that's been quite an interesting, we're asking for that to be moved back. It'll be about a $13 million fiscal impact. Exclusionary K-12 environment, this is one we feel is very important. We don't think any school that takes public dollars should be excluding any of our kids. So our LGBT, if you're paying attention to suicide rates, that is very concerning. And so we're very aware that population is 3 times more to contemplate, 5 times more to attempt. And IYI put out some really good information that we're sharing with schools, but our concern is we still have schools that are allowed to have policies that are exclusionary of kids that fall under that umbrella, and we don't think that's acceptable. So an exclusionary K-12 environment, we would also like to see that at the adult level as well if schools are taking public dollars. For advocating for high school models such as P-TECH, that is a model that is started in Brooklyn in 11 and is expanding rapidly because it embraces that career tech ed piece, where instead of saying we are K-12, it says we are K-14. It allows for schools to get kids across the finish line at different points of the finish line. We are taking teams to Chicago. We've been out to New York. We're getting ready to go out to Colorado. So the model is not a new model, but it would be newer to Indiana since it hasn't been introduced here. There's just a lot of that model that makes sense to what Indiana's trying to accomplish. So we would like to see that considered, whether it be a pilot or whether we let schools have the flexibility. We would need some help with allowing some of those adult monies to flow in certain areas. But I also know, too, we're kind of waiting on the governor's workforce to come out with a report to say what is happening with all those monies, to see does this fit nicely or does it not. So that's kind of a to be determined. School improvement, again, we would love to get to a single accountability system. So all of you who go to state board meetings, bless your hearts. We're trying to get there. But we still have the ESSA plan that you have to legally follow. It's not a choice. And you still have Indiana state accountability. And sometimes we tried to get in as close as possible. We just can't get there because the ESSA plan is still inclusionary of all students. It's also looking at subgroups. There are pieces of it that make it different from Indiana's accountability system, but we're trying to get to one. We know we want to be transparent, inclusive, and make it clear to parents what that accountability actually means. Charter school quality, we're still going to go after it. I think, it's one thing to say we're choice for the sake of choice. It's another thing to say we're a state of quality choice. Students are very mobile. It does us no good to allow any type of choice to happen without some type of accountability. So the fiscal and the academic piece, And how do we look at authorizers a little different? So we've had a lot of support from some national folks who are supportive of charters. They're just supportive of, it's got to be about quality. It can't be open the doors and hope for the best. It's got to be about quality. School safety. That is going to be one of our priorities again. I know during the special session we got a little bit of help with $5 million. When you spend about $50 million on testing per year and $14 million on safety per year, I think it's a discussion about priorities. So we will go after that again to look at what revenues are available. We simply can't, as a state, say we're going to be status quo with providing a $9 million or a $14 million grant for school safety. Our schools are telling us, they're signaling to us, we need some help, we need some resources in school safety. I am not one to mandate one size fits all. I think that's irresponsible as a state superintendent, as a local superintendent, as a teacher. I know that doesn't work. What works in IPS certainly doesn't work at Yorktown, and what works at Yorktown does not work somewhere in Randolph County. So we're all very different. We need the local schools to decide what works. Whether that's through referendum, whether that's through using TIF district monies, whether that is using criminal justice monies a little differently, we need to have discussion, which I know many of them upstairs have been great partners to start those discussions, but we need help legislatively to make some of that happen. The other piece of it is that some of those monies are very restricted on what we can spend it on. We would like to broaden it up to address the social emotional piece, because as we know, there are no yellow flags. When we see red flags, they're pretty red at that point. But usually that's a social emotional tie that we need some assistance. So school safety will be a big piece of it. We're also going to continue on to say, if you're taking public dollars, I don't think it is wise of us as a state to say, dependent upon what school you attend, depends upon the level of oversight in the area of safety. Indiana picks and chooses that whole oversight piece. This is one of those that I wish we were a little bit more heavy-handed to say, you have to have a school safety specialist, which is free. You have to have a plan, which is free. You have to run drills, which is free. And I know you can say, well, really, it's not free because it's time. But many of those are offered at no expense other than a school's time. We even pay for travel. So as a parent, I would hope my child was afforded those same security thresholds as any other child in Indiana. So I'm not saying people aren't paying attention to safety, that they're not doing a good job, but we're leaving a lot of that up to chance. I've had some conversations with students, and when we talk about drilling, they look at me dead in the face and say, we don't drill. That is a problem. But until we have something at the state level to say this is what needs to happen, we will continue to hope for the best in some of our schools. Drug-free schools. As far as those monies have always been a little bit scarce, and I understand why, but with the epidemics that we will see, today it's opioids, tomorrow it'll be something else. We know it'll be a continuation. I know for the governor and for the mayors of our cities, it is a struggle, I understand, and it's an expensive struggle, but I will say for us, we're asking for some of those dollars to help support that. We're also saying for every $1 spent on our end, you're saving 11 on the other. So that early intervention with social emotional is going to be a large piece. We're also looking at the academic increases of the schools who have had heavy SEL programs. We're looking at 11 percentile point difference in those schools who have good programs and those schools who don't for our most at-risk students. So it's not something we should look at lightly. We should, for obvious reasons for their social, for their emotional, for the mental health, their academics, the whole piece. We all know that, but we need to have some monies behind that. Also, child abuse prevention. That went through last session, but I will be honest, Randy Head has been great, Senator Head's been great to work with us, but we're having a little bit of a hard time finding really good vetted evidence-based programs. So we need to open that up to look at some research-based and evidence-based to give schools better options. Schools aren't pushing back to say we don't want to do it. We're struggling to find good tools to make that happen. So we're working across partners and agencies to try to help us with that, but that's a piece we might need a little bit of legislative language fix. Teacher appreciation grants, for many of our schools, those are the only dollars our teachers see. And so we will fight to continue that. We know we took a little bit of a hit in that, and I understand that, but we are just fighting to maintain that amount for our teachers. For those districts who that is the only new money that our teachers see, and usually it's a stipend, and you have to hit different qualifications for that, but that is an important thing that I would hope would not go away. So we will fight for that. The other one is kind of an interesting piece of the assessment. We are hoping to see ISTAR KR I read and I learn align. So this is the first time we're having a conversation about the iStar KR through preschool from On Our Way Pre-K. We need that continuation so that we're not wasting money, so that we have good data coming at us, so we are assessing for a reason. So there's a lot of pieces to that, but we would need some help legislatively. We understand the Public Law 109 with the reading requirements. This is not saying we would dummy that down or change necessarily. We're looking at how do we morph I Read 3 into our systemic assessment. So that is an important piece that we need to have a conversation about to allow for flexibility. Going back to licensure flexibility, we're looking at our career specialists and our workplace specialists that have to work a zillion years before they can prove they can go into a classroom and teach it. We're saying instead of those threshold of 6,000 hours or 10,000 hours or whatever the case may be, we need to get those hours down. For someone to have to work in a workforce in a field for 5 years before they can go into a classroom and teach us when we desperately need assistance with that doesn't make a lot of sense. We understand the biggest concern is pedagogy. Just because you know content doesn't mean you can go into a classroom and teach it. But I have a lot of faith in our schools that we're doing a lot of training, even with those who are that come out of traditional programs, we're still providing a ton of training, which those folks benefit from. So we're saying in order to, again, look at those CDE courses, look at some of our high school courses and some of those higher level math, higher level science, we need that flexibility. Some of you who have been in law could teach a law course at high school, but some of you can't because of parameters placed on you. We've had that conversation. So, but I think those hours are somewhat problematic. For some of the hours that are more practical, then we make people jump through hoops and go through more courses. That's where we're getting hung up because people are like, I got my job, I got my family, I'm not playing this game, figure it out. So we need legislative help to make that happen. Operational effectiveness, this is the biggie. This is where we're getting into tuition support. So we're asking for 3% both years. The rate of inflation is 2.8. We know that is a huge ask. But because of our districts that you will still, because the money follows the student, we'll still have districts that will take a loss. So we're trying to be realistic. We know revenues under the gun right now and people are watching it closely, but that will be our ask. It'll amount to about $7.4 billion. The second year about $7.6 billion. Remember, our budget is $8 billion from the state of Indiana and $1 billion from the feds. So we run about $9 billion. Pre-K special education since 1991, we're hanging on to that 2750. We love that number. Well, it's time. So we have about 13,000 students who are enrolled in pre-K special education, and that $22,750 that has been in place since 1991 isn't cutting it. So our advocates for special ed, our parents of special ed, our teachers of special ed, our administrators, across the board, every year people have this conversation. So we're going to go right back at it one more time. That is an expense. I was a special ed teacher. I understand the expense of educating a child who's identified as special needs. Pre-K adds on another layer to that. So we have got to be cognizant of that and look at that. We've had about a 200% increase in students enrolled, and so we have to have the resources to follow. We're also asking for increases in assessment, curriculum reimbursement, and English learners. So for assessment, that's going to be a tricky one because depending on what the state decides to pay for grad pathways, that number could get really big really fast. If not, that looks a little bit different. So we have different numbers that we've given for our budget upstairs to say it's either going to go from here or to here, and it's a big gap, it's a big span. Just in iStar KR though alone, so you know, that would be a $2 million. That's a new ask that is desperately needed. Also a $500,000 to go to looking at the rigor and kind of doing some analysis of our assessments. But our big ask for assessment always runs about 50 to 60. Those asks are going to be big, again, depending on what the state's willing to pay for grad pathway assessments. Curricular reimbursement is the textbook for free and reduced, that fund that gets reimbursed. Just so you know, we always have about a 10 to 11 million shortfall from what is asked from districts versus what we get. So we're going from 39 million, we're asking for 50 million to cover that shortfall. That's always an ask. You have a lot of different opinions on textbook, whether we should be charging at all, but at least that shortfall piece is a part of the discussion for an ask. That would move it from about $78 a student to about $100 a student in order to make that happen. REL is a population, that's our English learners, that's a population that is continuing to explode. A lot of opportunities with our EL population, but a lot of challenges come with that as well for our students, our families, and our educators. We're asking for about an increase of about $16.5 million. That would take the base from a $300 to a $450 per student ask. And just to put it in perspective, we have about 1,965 schools out of our total schools who are reporting EL. So it's not happening. Sometimes people think, well, that's 50 districts, or that's a small number of schools. It's not a small number of schools any longer. That number is exploding. So we have about 59,000 students who are identified as English language learners that we're serving. So we know the need is there. Again, that's one of those, when I go across the state, I hear about our ISTEP materials, I hear about our EL population, special ed pre-K, but it is one of those that by far is one of the top 5, because people are concerned about, if we're going to service these students and do it well, we got to have resources to back it. Medicaid. Forever Medicaid reimbursement, the 3% that was captured went to the state's general fund. We're saying allow the schools to keep it. Allow them to keep it. So there would be 173 districts impacted at the tune of $355,000. No one's getting rich. The state of Indiana is not getting rich on this, but it certainly would help those individual schools who are claiming Medicaid. So we're saying let them keep the 3%. Another one is the teacher 30-day hold that I know came into play not too long ago. It's probably more administrative friendly than teacher friendly, but I can't name too many other jobs where you say, I'm going to resign, I'm giving you 2 weeks, and they're like, no, just kidding, you've got to give us 30 days. So we are trying to be practical. That impacts the classroom. So if someone puts a hold on a teacher, then you have another school disrupted. And a lot of times those people will take their days and it becomes a nightmare anyway, so then you have 2 schools disrupted. So we're trying to, again, probably it's an administrative friendly piece, but as far as the teacher goes at times, it can be a real struggle. And for some administrators. I know where that came out of because there's a lot of mobility in the 11th hour with teachers. I'm just not sure we're accomplishing what was intended to accomplish by the 30-day hold, so something to discuss. Reciprocity. We are not a state of 100% reciprocity for teacher license. That means if you come into Indiana, you've got some hoops you got to jump through, even though you've taught in Ohio for 15 years, you still got to come here and take another test to prove you can do it. There are 6 states that have full reciprocity. I think it's time Indiana take a look at that. So we're already discussing whether there's a need for an Indiana exam. We're already discussing if there are needs for Indiana-specific type of things that go along with the license. If we're going to have that discussion, we need to open it up and have the discussion. So 6 states are already doing it. 35 states have maybe not gone full reciprocity, but they also have said, you know what, if they've taught for X amount of years, we will give it. Anything below those years, maybe we will take a look at something as far as an assessment or whatever it may be. So we are open to look at that, but we have numerous people call the department every day that have taught in Alaska for 20 years and they are struggling to get a license here, which is ridiculous. So name the state, we're just trying to make it much easier and much smoother to happen. On a good note, which was on our celebration, so we've had an uptick in our military veterans who have received teacher licenses by 50% over the last 2 years. So I think that's a positive thing, being a mom of a kid who better be studying right now at a military academy. I understand the importance of options for our military veterans, and I think that's a positive thing to celebrate. Communication disorders with speech language path. Just so you know, the emergency permit provision for those students who are identified as communication disorder, that ended in July of 18. You can imagine the phone calls we got because try to find a speech language pathologist. So 23 corporations were put into a pickle because they had no options. So we need that run back up to allow for an emergency permit. And I'll be honest, I don't think it was intentional. I don't think it was something that someone was just out to make it miserable for 23 plus corporations. I think honestly it was one of those things that maybe the time lapsed. And so we need to get back on our radar and move forward and try to get those emergency permits going again. Speech, language, anything under communication disorders, to hire those personnel is extremely expensive, but it's also extremely difficult to find those who are properly licensed. So we need some help. This one's interesting as far as advocating for coaches and referees who participate in IHSA. Right now, I have revoked quite a few licenses for not out of teachers. I'm not talking about the coaches right now, just teachers for several reasons. I have little patience for behaviors that don't lend itself well in the classroom. And so we're saying broaden that up to our coaches and our referees, because there is no communication. I can't go tell IHSA, hey, I just revoked this teacher's license, but they can, if they're not doing their homework, hire that person to be the X, you name the sport, coach, and they can get certified. And if someone doesn't do their homework, there's no triggering that. So we're saying let that certification, if it's under Section 8 crimes, let there be a mechanism for us to trigger IHSA to say, hey, we just revoked them based on this, or they have a suspended license. Let us trigger that, and then they need to make those decisions. So that's one of those that it makes sense. We just haven't had it, and we have had situations that haven't been good situations. And so we are being diligent to hopefully streamline those efforts. So with that, those are our legislative priorities for 2019. Questions?
Jennifer, how much is all this going to cost? Looking at just all the different programs here and there, what's going to be the fiscal impact of all this?
Well, if you include the tuition support, I mean, I don't have that total amount for you, but you're probably up to about $8 billion. So it's a big lift. You know, we're over half the state's budget. It's a big ask. So I can get those numbers to you so you have an overall number. We have it line by line items, obviously. We have worked more so this year with the Department of Administration, the budget offices, and some folks who are really taking us to task on why that budget item and doing their homework, which I commend them as being responsible and with those tax dollars. But we'll see how that plays out. But we've had a big ask this year.
On the 3% each year for tuition support, can you tell us what that equals? I mean, you told us the total, but in new dollars?
New dollars depends on the school. Is that where you're going?
No, I just meant the total for the tuition support.
Mike, do you have the new dollars, what that would amount to? We can get that to you. The fiscal piece for sure, fiscal accountability. I mean, some of that is look at the common school loan situation we have. So some of that is on the fiscal piece, and then the academic side of authorizers. So some states are now being raised to authorizers to say, okay, your letter grade based on criteria is X, whatever that may be, so that it triggers, should they, one, be eligible to continue to advocate and continue to authorize, or two, it gives parents and the schools who are entering into a lot more information. So that would be the accountability piece. So we've had this conversation every session I've been in, and it doesn't go very far, but I think as a taxpayer, I just think anytime someone's taking taxpayer money, they should be accountable, just like our traditional public schools. We are very transparent with our money and our academics. I think that same should be afforded for charters. And frankly, I mean, I know where I'm at. I know I'm in Indiana, but frankly, for those schools who accept vouchers, I think that same transparency should be there. It's taxpayer money.
When you talked about the inclusive K-12 environment and being able to deny admission to LGBT, are you talking about, we're talking about voucher schools, correct? Mm-hmm. And can you just talk about, I mean, lawmakers have been very unwilling to put any requirements on voucher schools for admissions. So talk to me about why you think that's important.
So if our goal of the state is to develop a well-educated workforce, and one that we want businesses to come here because we're inclusive, we are accepting, I think part of that goes to our actions. And when we still have schools that receive taxpayer dollars that can exclude students, that's a problem. So we are trying to work on what would that look like. I mean, obviously it would have to, all their admission policies would be a bit controlled, but we just believe as a department, and we will work with legislators. Now, you all know, again, where we are and where we live, and sometimes that's popular upstairs and sometimes it's not. But I think the notion that you can't send a child that takes taxpayer monies to a school because they identified LGBT, I think that's a little bit antiquated, and it should not be accepted in the state.
You said you'd like to see it extended to employment as well?
I would, if they're taking taxpayer dollars. If they're not taking taxpayer dollars, I mean, obviously I have no say in that, and I will stay out of their business. But if you are taking taxpayer money, I think it would, we need to expand that same principle to schools.
How high is school safety on your priorities list, and what specifically would you like to see lawmakers do?
Yeah, so obviously it's always a top priority, and I know in the moment we see waves of urgency based on events, and that can be unfortunate. But for us, it's constant. It's a constant urgency, it's a constant priority. So it's gonna be high on our conversation list, and it has remained high. We've had a lot of General Assembly folks here that have asked some great questions. We've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different agencies. I have to also say that Director Langley from Homeland Security has been a very good partner with us, but so have the Sheriff Association, State Police, all the above. So we will, the money ask is going to be big. So we are hoping, I mean, a small ask would be to maintain the dollars that we saw during the special session, but that is a very small ask. That was an additional small pot of money that was already asked. It was denied because we ran out of money through the Criminal Justice Institute grants. So that amount, we're going to have conversations on what exactly that would look like, but obviously that's going to be big. But beyond that, we are also realistic in those asks may not go where we want them to go, so we have to look at other mechanisms for revenue flow. For us, that means you got TIF districts, you've got the referendum options, you have Criminal Justice Institute matching that could be broadened up and what that score could be broadened up. So there are already layers in place in the state that could be broadened up or added to that would be helpful. Now I know the referendum conversation has gotten interesting because I now have districts saying you're going to have the haves and the have-nots to the layer of degree that they need it to be for school safety, because to get a referendum passed in this district is impossible, and the other district you just whisper you're having a referendum and you pass it the next day. So the discrepancy in referendums is also concerning, but we've had much better luck with referendums here in the past year or two. So, but that would be a piece that some would argue you could do it now, but we would like to see that referendum go for school safety and expand the time. So the years would, instead of 8, we could maybe get to 10 or 12. So we would have more of an option for that school safety piece.
What do you want state lawmakers to do in terms of school safety? Because you mentioned kids told you we don't do security drills, and you were upset that it really isn't a statewide mandate. So what specifically maybe one or two examples?
Yeah, traditional public schools have to run drills, so I'm not running into that because they have to submit plans, they have to submit their school safety, they have to submit more information. So, and when we are out auditing and talking to schools, public traditional schools have to run drills, and it's happening. So there are many charters and non-pubs that are doing that as well. They are. So there are some that are doing a great job with school safety, but there are some that we are leaving it to chance because there's no oversight from the state. Now again, if you're not taking public dollars, I understand that's not my wheelhouse. But if you're taking public dollars, the school safety threshold should be what it is. It's no different than you go to a restaurant, there's some basic threshold that is a safe place to eat. So, but that's controlled by the Department of Health. We're just saying, let us control those basic thresholds of safeties for all schools. I don't want a child to attend a school, and just because of the type of school it is, their safety threshold is woefully where it should be. I just don't think it's acceptable.
So you want a level playing field?
I do. We tried to go after that last year. We made baby steps, but baby steps aren't good enough when we're talking about school safety. These should be one big leap for mankind when it's talking about school safety. So we'll see where it goes. It's going to take courage from some of our lawmakers.
Have you pinned down how far you want to expand that in the next biennium? How many more students or how many more counties is realistic to?
On the pre-K? Yeah, so honestly, we're not that far yet. We know we support the biggest expansion we can do, but we know we're realistic as far as the dollars. So, you know, that on the way pre-K doesn't come through our budget ask, but we are supportive of any expansion we can get for that because it obviously does directly affect us. The 3,000 is a little bit disheartening, although I'm not being critical because I'm happy Indiana's providing it. So it's a good first step. However, we've got a ways to go with some of our students at risk, and when you're only touching 20 counties, we've got a lot more counties to go that could use those services.
Jennifer, have you folks figured out, when you say that the school is taking public dollars, that kind of brings them maybe under some of the umbrellas of the public rules that traditional public schools have to follow? Any sort of, I guess, sort of threshold, like you take 1 voucher kid, is that kick in everything, or take 10 voucher kids, or?
You take one.
Okay.
Public dollars. You know, given the legislative priorities and given the work that the department has done, it has been a big lift. And I'm extremely proud, like I said, extremely proud of it. And what I can't afford to do, and you all know this because you've been around the State House for a while, and some of you still work at the State House, that noise can be a problem and it can be distracting. And I have no patience for that because I got into this office because I said I'm going to do what's right for kids. And we have stayed focused on kids, our team has stayed focused on kids, and we will continue to stay focused on kids. And my appointment is getting a lot of noise. And I'll tell you, that's beyond frustrating. It's one of those that all it is right now is noise because it's unnecessary and it is detracting from the good work that we're trying to do and that local schools are trying to do. You know, I have no intention of running for a second run at this office, so a second term is not on my radar. So I would hope that those who continue to keep the noise going for their sake of political reasons would tone things down. So again, I didn't get into this race for problems to be caused for kids. It's about a focus on students, and that appointment is ridiculous that is causing so much commotion in the state of Indiana. I'm a firm believer, though, however, that citizens should have a voice. They should have a voice in education. So if it's not in my office, because you all have seen the bills, that ship has sailed, if it's not in my office, it should at least be looked at from the state board or other ends where citizens have a voice in public education. We are half of the state's budget. We are half of the state's budget. We are the future of Indiana. So for those to detract by just keeping things stirred up is just at this point ridiculous, and it's discouraging. So to put that out now, to say I have no intentions of running for a second term, hopefully we'll calm that rhetoric down. We will continue to work tirelessly. This is going to look just as impressive the second part of my term. We will continue to do what's best for kids. As a mom, I would expect nothing less. As an educator, I would do nothing less. As your state superintendent, I promise you, we will continue to work hard and do amazing things.
So you're not going to run for second?
Yeah.
I have no intentions.
Why not?
You know, we've done some great work. When I got into this office, my charge was I want to do what's best for kids. I think back at that time and it was so cute. I was so naive. And so now that I learned the governance structure, things are very complicated in Indiana, and I still have a passion for kids. My team has a passion for kids. We can get things done for kids. But when the governance structure is becoming a problem for kids, that's not why I intended to get into office. Will I use my voice for kids? Absolutely. I've got a lot of energy in me and I got a lot of passion in me to help students, and so does our team. But what I won't tolerate is political pulling down those efforts or sucking the oxygen out of the room. So that's my reason why.
So do you think you just said you believe the public should have a voice. The appointment doesn't kick in until 2024. Should that be moved back to 2020 if you're not running?
I mean, obviously that's not my authority. What I would hope is I've learned a lot across the nation about state superintendents who are appointed, and you know, I see them at one meeting and the next meeting they're all gone because it's a revolving door. So I watch that and I'm like, I'm not sure that's healthy. I also watch the state board and I'm not sure that's healthy. So I just watch sometimes the governance structure of Indiana and think, how can it improve? I'm not opposed. I understand. If I were the governor of Indiana, I too would want someone paddling in the same direction to get things accomplished. I understand that. We have limited resources, limited people, limited time. I understand that. I'm not oblivious to that. However, I also understand if I'm sitting in Delaware County, I want a voice for my child. So I see both sides of it, but there is a mechanism to do it, whether it's my office or the state board or other mechanisms. There are ways to do it, but you have to have the political will to do it, and that's out of my wheelhouse.
Is part of the reason, Jennifer, why you have such an aggressive agenda is in fact because you decided not to take a second bite of the apple, just sort of go, for lack of a better term, balls to the wall and just see how much you can get done?
Okay, we're K-12, filter. So, cameras over there. So what I will say to that is, part of it is we learned. So the first session I came, I'll be honest with you again, I was green. And then the last session, I tried to play nice thinking it was a budget session and we didn't talk about money. That was good. So I'm like, okay, so that doesn't really count either. So I try to, we're pretty rule followers. I was an educator, so I was trying to follow how things were, learning the hard way. Now that I kind of know the game, I was trying to play by rules and play under just play differently. And now that I understand more so, I've lived it a little bit, 630 days isn't a lifetime, but boy, it is dog years here. So it's been interesting, but I've learned a lot, so I think I feel a little bit more comfortable being a little bit more aggressive, I've also learned too the needs better across the state. So I become more familiar with our schools. You know, I knew my school, I knew my county, but now I'm very familiar with a lot of the needs across the state, and I know too how reliant they are on some common sense and how reliant we are on someone who will just try to continue to be a voice for kids.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when you say that you don't have any intention to run again, you're not saying you've made up your mind.
I've made up my mind. I'm not going to run for state superintendent.
What do you want to say to families and students about state who don't like the idea of not being here?
Well, and I am honored to serve Indiana. Again, I got in it for the purpose of kids. I will continue to work for kids. We've got great partners that we're working with on our team at the department. I will always be here for kids. I will not waver from that, and I won't play politics. We've been Ellis Island from the beginning. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, come one, come all, let's get something done. So it has been an honor to serve Indiana, but I will serve Indiana. I will still serve students until for the rest of my life. It just may not be in this role.
When you say the government structure gets in the way of serving kids, are we referring to partisan politics that takes place, or is it something in the system that could be changed in terms of where the budgets are?
Indiana's tricky. I mean, I go across the nation and people will go, "Oh, you're the superintendent of Indiana," and so I'm like, yeah. So Indiana's tricky, and there are some good things that come out of that trickiness, and some real challenges that come out of that trickiness. And so you have my office, which many of you know, much of the authority has been stripped away. But yet we're still responsible for the work, and we still have an enormous responsibility to students. So we take that seriously, and we try to break down barriers and use opportunities and control our controllables and do them very, very well. But there's a lot of that isn't in our wheelhouse or has been pulled away from us that makes things a little bit difficult when we're still the implementer. We still have the charge of meeting federal law and state law. So it's just complicated. And again, there are some opportunities tied to that I think Indiana has done well in some areas, but with that comes real challenges. And when I get to the point where, you know, for 2 years we've accomplished this in a machine that moves at extremely slow, I know we can do it. I know our team has it in them, and we will keep working tirelessly to make it happen. But I know there's a lot more that we can offer students, but because of barriers, it's a struggle. And so that's the stuff that can be quite frustrating.
What would a better system look like?
Well, I think better alignment between, you know, before the state board alignment did not look like it does now. I mean, we've gone through some growing pains as a state. I understand why. I was hopeful, again, that was cute, I was kind of naive getting in, that would, and I had many conversations, that governance structure doesn't make sense. It's not student friendly, it's not school friendly at times. I mean, you get mixed motions, you get mixed conversations, you get mixed messages, and when you're in the field, that's when it becomes really hard. So we were like, you got to streamline that. I was used to, as a superintendent, working with the local board, which I know is very, very different than this. This is like very different. But the theory of how that worked, where everybody was professional and we kind of laid out the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm used to being very transparent and trying to meet the letter of the law but service kids. I take that very seriously. And so with this structure, it makes that very difficult to do. So I'm still responsible for a lot, but there are a lot of pressures that push on that sometimes aren't real comfortable because of just the areas they're pushing.
Did you inform the governor and state party, or is this the first time you've ever talked about your decision?
The governor's office, we reached out. The schedules are very difficult. We're going to talk today. The state party, I have not discussed it with them. I mean, for my family, and me personally, and for my friends that have sacrificed a lot, many of them sitting in this room, you know, this is a personal decision for me. I don't feel like I owe it to anyone. It's not like I certainly had a ton of money support or otherwise. So I don't, and you know, that's kind of the beauty of me. I don't owe anyone but kids. And that's exactly where you want the state superintendent to be. You don't owe anyone but kids. And so that's where I'm at today. So I will certainly talk to the governor and we'll have that conversation, but you know, as far as my family knows, the folks who are closest to me know, and we'll move on and go from there. I've certainly, as a state superintendent, learned a lot. I've gained a lot of great friends and great mentors. I've lost some friends and lost some mentors, and so that's the name of this office. And so I understand that, but the focus going forward is 2 years. We got a lot of work to do, and I promise you, we're gonna get a lot of impressive work done.
Real quick, could you talk about the kindergarten cutoff date change? Because earlier this summer, lawmakers passed like a test that there was no change today for I think a year, and I heard from some parents really upset by that. Talk about why you want to change the date and then fiscal impact, because schools are going to lose money if they let these students in.
Yeah, I think the intent to change, and I know we worked with Senator Mishler and Representative Brown at the time. We worked with them on, we were trying to figure out we gave them a lot of data. They were trying to be very thoughtful. So I'm not going to say they just slapped it on paper and called it a day. They were trying to be thoughtful we had some districts who were taking 4-year-olds very, very late, and some of them were repeating it. So it was kind of like a preschool system. And that's not the intent of taking an early 4-year-old. And so they put parameters on it. I think in the end, the parameters we introduced weren't quite as tight, but when it came out, it was pretty tight. So I think there may be a willingness now to back off of that a little bit, but the intent was it should be for those students who are kindergarten ready, not a 4-year-old who comes in, does kindergarten, and repeats it, because as a state then we're paying for kindergarten twice, and that was not the intent of those dollars. So that was the purpose of it. Plus, when I'm watching appropriations, and last year, you remember the shortfall per se that I commend upstairs, they got that taken care of. But some of that, when you can't control those numbers because of repetitiveness, that's where things get a little interesting. So I think the intent was not malicious. I think the intent was to try to get a handle on what was happening and be smart with some of those funds. So that's why I think they're going to try to move
For
back.
2 more questions.
Does your desire to leave have anything to do with the chairman of the House and Senate education committees, and do there need to be term limits on those people?
For me, it really goes down to, there are a lot of things in the governance structure of Indiana and the world of politics that, again, there are opportunities with that and there are many challenges with that. You know, it's not my decision who chairs committees. My hope is that those people who chair those committees will come to the table and listen. That we don't always agree, but they will come to the table and listen. They will remain focused on all kids, not selective groups, and move things forward in partnerships. That's my hope, but I don't make that call. I have worked well with, I know Senator Long's leaving us, and we've tried to talk him out of that several times, but but I'm sure Senator Bray will be great if that pans out. We've worked well with Speaker Bosma. So the leadership piece has worked well for us. We've had a lot of Senate Ed Committee has been good to work with us, coming to the table and chatting, and the Ed Committee, when asked, they also will participate, but nothing's perfect in politics, but I'm not the person that makes those calls. So that's up to the leadership upstairs.
Can you explain a little bit, you've talked about, I don't know, some discussion going on about your appointment. What has been going on behind the scenes that...
You know, you have pockets of people, and it's the same people, it doesn't surprise me, but you always have pockets of people who want to keep the discussion alive, whether they should move it up, whether it goes away, whether yada yada. It creates disruption. So when I have schools calling, going, what's going on? Are you not going to be there? And that whole conversation going on, all it is a disruption. As a parent, I would not be happy if my state superintendent or our local superintendents or our local principals were spending time on noise. And that's simply what this has become. So for that conversation to keep coming up and suck all of our energies out, to me, it's just, I am growing very weary of that. So the best way I can help shut that down is just to let people know I'm not running again. And if they choose to move it up, or if they choose to dissolve it totally and move a different direction, that's up to them, but I want all the chips to be out on the table early enough so conversations can happen.
It's good.
We good? Thank you, everybody. Again, thanks for your coverage.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Kind of dropped that on us there.
Yeah.
Good seeing you.